Welcome back to Front Forum Focus, the podcast dedicated to bringing like-minded people together to talk about issues in our society and highlight interesting projects and inspiring people. Today's guest is redefining what it means to create real impact. She is the founder of the Awari Collective. Welcome, Elena.
Thank you so much, George. It's a pleasure to be here.
So my first question is, what was the aha moment that you realized that you wanted to start the journey to impact?
Good question. There were definitely a few over the years. So from a very young age, I knew that I wanted to try to make the world better. And I think that came a lot from my parents. I was often reminded that I was privileged in growing up in a middle class home in Cleveland, Ohio, where we had access to not only basic needs, but opportunities as well. And I really got to see that. We would travel a lot, and I got to see a lot of different places and cultures and people that lived very differently than I did. And some of it I really learned a lot from. All of it I learned a lot from, but the one time or trip that really stands out to me is when I was 9 or 10, and we went to Jamaica. And as part of the trip, we traveled throughout the island. We didn't just stay on the resort like most people do when they go. And we went through Kingston, which is a very, very poor city. And I had never seen anything like that in my life. It was the first time where I really saw what it looks like to not have one's basic needs met: clothes, shelter, food, clean water, things like this. And I just cried. Like, I cried the whole bus ride back. And I just knew from that moment that I wanted to try to help close the gap between people who have their basic needs met and therefore have the ability to pursue opportunities in life and reach their full potential, and those who are just existing in survival mode, because I just don't think that it's okay that we have such a huge gap between the two, considering that none of us chooses what family we're born into. And then from there, I realized that majority of one's life is spent working. So I figured that if I really genuinely wanted to make an impact and try to make the world better, I would have to do so through my career, because I didn't think that I could dedicate enough time to get what needed to be done handled without also taking the more than 1/3 of the time that we spend in our lives dedicated to our career.
So looking back at your career and also that aha moment, what are the biggest milestones that you have seen, and what has shaped your perspective towards?
Yeah, so I'm pretty early on in my career still. I'm only 24, so I'm hoping that there will be many, many more milestones to come. And I'm really looking forward to all of the challenges and learning opportunities that I have yet to face in my career. I always see, setbacks as a way to learn and a way to grow and broaden my skill set. And I think that that's really important in this industry, because there are quite a few setbacks, typically all of the time. Nothing always goes according to plan because there's so many influencing factors, government policy, culture, history, finances and resources, aligning incentives and institutions, and getting people to care about problems that they never even knew about in the past. So I think that it's kind of hard to choose a specific milestone that's like so huge right now, because I hope that the biggest milestone in my career is yet to come. But one thing that has shaped what I'm currently building and focusing on was, it all kind of started when I moved to Geneva. I'm currently based in Geneva, Switzerland. And the reason why I moved here is because I wanted to be closer to where it all happened, essentially, in terms of global policy and the decision makers that influence the ripple effects that happen around the world. So I started working with nonprofits in Nigeria specifically focused on global health and fundraising for them, and going to events at the UN and at Graduate Institute in Geneva, and just every event that I could get my hands on, really, to talk to the right people and figure out how the system works and what's missing, and also help gain some visibility for these really impactful grassroots projects that I was supporting in Nigeria. And I think that the thing that I learned the most from it is that the global development system is so incredibly complex and bureaucratic that it's like falling in on itself because it's too heavy. There's so many actors and so many people just to give an approval, to go be sent to the next person to get an approval. Every single one of those people takes up critical resources that we could be using elsewhere. And that's not to say that there doesn't need to be investment in the sector, because there definitely does, but there also needs to be investment with the mindset of using what resources we have to the best of our abilities and to the most cost-effective abilities. And I just talked to and met so many people who knew that this was an issue, but couldn't fix it from internal to the system. And at the time, my goal was to work for the UN. And that work, being in these situations and being in these rooms with the people that had been working in these huge organizations, not just the UN, but many others, for 15, 20 years, and me identifying a problem that they said that they have experienced and they didn't know how to solve it, made me realize that I don't think that I can create that kind of change from inside of the organization. And that is what ultimately led for me to kind of go off on my own and try to figure out how to build this kind of community that centers human connection and essentially social proof in empowering people to make impact. I hope that helps. I hope that's not too roundabout of an answer.
Yeah, that's really awesome to hear about your journey, the steps that you're taking currently, to create real impact. Being based in Switzerland, what has been the biggest challenges that you have faced while trying to?
It's a very good question. I think that the biggest challenges that I faced are skepticism and lack of trust. I think that it all stems from a lack of trust. And it's not just really in Switzerland, it's kind of around the world. But there's been this stereotype narrative that people in the whole of sub-Saharan Africa, but specifically in Nigeria, it often comes about that there's this stories that people create a nonprofit just to funnel the money into their personal accounts and agendas, and all of the dollars that are given just are taken and not used for the right reasons. Yeah, so I think that this is not just necessarily Switzerland, it's kind of everywhere, but Switzerland is quite a wealthy country, so people are they need to know exactly where their resources are going, and require a lot of social proof to spend money on things, because financially there's a very high level of financial literacy and people are very smart with their money, stereotypically speaking, right? Like not everybody, but in general. So I think that the number one challenge is combating the active stereotype that people on the African continent are not trustworthy and don't deserve to be the direct recipient or beneficiary of the money, slash that there are multiple levels of intermediaries needed in order to give funds to anyone on the African continent in a way that can be tracked and trusted. That has been difficult because if there was no thought process around it, right, if it was a blank slate, it would be much easier to kind of come with this idea and have people get on board with getting to see the direct impact of your dollars and getting connected directly with the organizations on the ground. But because this stereotype has been in place and it has been kind of rooted and repeated and solidified, even though it's not always true. Yes, it does happen sometimes. And it's such a shame because it's one of those cases of kind of the few who are doing the wrong thing, creating problems for the many who are doing the right thing, right? But because it has been repeated so many times, we really have to go above and beyond when it comes to our level of transparency and our level of evidence that we provide and how much vetting we do on these organizations. For example, a lot of our supporters and community members didn't feel comfortable giving funds until we had people on the ground doing in-person verifications of the projects, even though a lot of our partner organizations had already been highly vetted and were picked out of like the top 0.5% of organizations that applied. And were sending us photos and video evidence and receipts and audited financial reports. There was still kind of a thought process that those could be tampered with or those could be modified or whatever. And so in the end, we ended up doing in-person verification. So we have an in-person West Africa coordinator, we have an East Africa coordinator, and essentially their main role is to travel to the different sites of the different projects and give us updates that we can trust. Even though we really do trust our pilot partners, it just adds an extra level of security. So I think that that's been probably one of the hardest things to kind of enforce in people who are interested but don't necessarily feel that they can trust what's going on, is how high our level of security is to kind of combat that stereotype. And then the other biggest challenge, I would say, is the fact that I'm a 24-year-old female who doesn't speak French very well. I'm learning, but Geneva is mainly French speaking. Most everyone speaks English because it's quite an international place to live. But definitely, like when people first see me, there's a judgment that's made that I am not credible in certain ways, or I don't have the experience or the expertise to be doing something like this, which I think that assumption kind of goes away once we start having a discussion. But that's definitely the initial judgment, and I don't think that that's going to go away anytime soon. And I'm sure that a lot of other young female founders experience that, whether they're in the impact space or not.
Yeah, that's like very, very valid challenges. I think also being like in the entrepreneurial space, there's a few female founders, so congratulations for being like one of them.
Thank you.
Also, like about the trust, that's also a big challenge. We did like a newsletter on what does trust really mean. So I think trust is one of the biggest challenges in the impact sector, and it uncovers a lot of like important questions for what impact really is, and just answering the question on what trust really means also is like a huge factor for all the stakeholders within impact. So from community managers, impact investors, also to the beneficiaries themselves, and also the people who are implementing the impact. So I believe there's a broad perspective of impact, and also these questions uncover the gaps that are there within these challenges.
Right. Yeah. What was the most widespread definition that you could find, or something that like the most people said, okay, yes, this is what it means to trust?
Yeah, that's a really cool question. So within our article, we featured community managers, founders, investors, and what trust really means. What we highlighted was like now the shift that is happening. Current landscape of trust is done through like basic kind of reports or kind of basic numbers, while the shift is going to proof. So proof of what is really happening, and now trust is like provable evidence of something. So that's like what everyone actually.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. It's very interesting to me because the business that I'm building, the community that I'm building with the Awari Collective, is trust is one of our main pillars, because it's incredibly necessary for the community to trust us and our partners to actually implement the projects that they're funding and continue maintaining relationships and be giving real-time information, whether that's good news or bad news. But also it's really important for our organizational partners to trust us with their financial data and trust us to help them get visibility and connect them with people that genuinely care about their missions and the communities that they're supporting. And then we also have to trust them to share the right stories because we're not on the ground with them. So we have to be trusting that they're sharing the most impactful stories from the communities and that they're being unbiased in sharing those stories with our community. So it's kind of trust goes all around. And I just find it so interesting what different people's definition of trust is, because it might differ and it might change. And I want our community to be all encompassing.
So I think now we are really highlighting what the Awari Collective does. So I think you can tell us deeper about how you how this idea came to be and how it directly addresses the impact gap in the world.
Yeah, definitely. So the evolution of this idea started when I was working with nonprofits in global health and fundraising for them. But there is this narrative of a lack of trust with grassroots organizations in sub-Saharan Africa. And I also realized how little money actually gets to the people who need it the most. So I was seeing some of the organizations that I was working with, mainly composed of volunteers, work 14 to 16-hour days trying to get mosquito nets out to people in super rural communities so that they could have a lower risk of mosquito-borne disease, or give seminars on how to find sources of clean water and what sources to use and what sources not to use and things like that, working their tails off. And they had no visibility in the global sphere and no resources whatsoever. And then I started talking to a lot of other grassroots organizations in the same situation. And I started seeing this common theme of okay, the actual people that are on the ground doing the work from all of these large scale information sharing campaigns that are implemented from the top level, or frameworks like the Sustainable Development Goals, all of these frameworks, these ways of communicating ideas on how to make the world better are all dictated in Geneva, essentially. And then they're passed down through the levels. And by the time they get to the bottom level, a lot of organizations are wanting to help push these through and work on these, and they're the ones actually doing the work that helps support them, but they're not receiving any of the resources or very little of the resources. And a big reason for that is because the current funding landscape relies so heavily on grants, and grants typically come from external donors that are based in the US and in Europe, and those grant makers can essentially set the priorities and set the requirements for how that money is being used and what the organization needs to do in order to maintain the grant and all of these things. Even though the grant maker may not be super familiar with the local context, they may not understand the scope of the problem or how to implement a solution that's localized. So I was seeing so often these programs that are a ton of resources are being poured into building hospitals or clinics or training community health workers or whatever it might be. And because the program curriculum or the way that it was structured by somebody that was not from the local area, the program was implemented and it worked while the institutional partners were still there implementing the program. And then as soon as the institutional partners pulled out and said, okay, this is yours now, it dies because there's no ownership. There's no local perspective that's going into it. That was really when I started seeing a lot that it's super, super important for not only a local perspective to be included in the conversation when we're talking about solutions, but to be the forefront. All of the community solutions should be led by the community members who are experiencing them. They're the ones who know what's going to work in their community and what people are going to do and how you can change somebody's behavior and what the infrastructure available is like, and et cetera, right? So they can identify the biggest problems that they're dealing with and they can help not only just help, but drive the solution. So that was kind of how I started thinking about, okay, how do we connect people who want to do good in the world? Because there are many of us that want to do good in the world and we just don't know where to go. To the people who actually need it the most, and the people who can drive the solutions in their communities and make them last and make them sustainable. And I think that social media is a wonderful connector. I also think that visual proof is incredibly important. Being able to see the village, the people, the solution, the problem, not just hear about it, but actually see it with your own eyes, is a picture is worth 1,000 words, right? So that was kind of the initial basis behind the idea, was how do we bring trust back to philanthropy? Okay. So how do we remove the veil between what somebody is donating to and what the outcome of that donation is, and actually just show people? And then B, how do we improve visibility and resources for the people on the ground that are doing the right things, that are trying to make the world better? How do we localize it, make it self-sustainable, and connect those two people? So that's essentially what we are. We're a community that connects the people who do and the people who want to help, or the people who care and the people who act. And I just really quickly, I know I'm going to wrap this up because I know that this is a very long-winded answer, but there was a lot kind of that went into this thought process. A big reason behind why I wanted to empower people to feel that they could make an impact and see the effects of their impact in the first place is because I think that we are in an empathy crisis. People just literally aren't as nice to each other anymore as they used to be. People don't have the same amount of patience with strangers. They're not nice to their neighbors, let alone strangers, right? And I think a big reason behind that is because we're constantly bombarded with so much information about all of the problems in the world, but we're not necessarily given ways or tools that I myself, Elena, can fix them. So like I could see a photo of a starving child and see famine and war and climate change and see the corals disappearing, but then I don't know what can I do about it, right? So without that ability to actually take action against something, people have to kind of retreat from their empathy and disconnect, because if you just sat there and felt horrible about all of the awful things going on in the world all day, every day, nobody would be able to function and do their jobs. And without that ability to actually take an action that is constructive against these problems, you just feel horrible. So you either feel horrible, you have to disconnect from that empathy. So my hope with Awari is that we're giving people an opportunity to actually take small actions that can make a huge impact to create change, that they can see that change, feel empowered by it, and then come back to their empathy, and everybody can just be a little bit nicer to each other.
That's a really inspiring perspective, and I think this coming from now, like my perspective, for us, like with Front Forum Focus, we started the podcast as a place for like-minded people to solve issues within our society through innovative projects, and a podcast to raise awareness. And I think now we even, we have done like impact dashboards that impact even drove into impact measurement. I would like to ask, like, what does your philanthropic work mean?
Oh, that's a really good question. It means everything to me. I mean, I think that every single person who is born with a level of opportunity or an opportunity to reach their fullest potential has the responsibility to try to make the world better. And I think that if more of us carried that responsibility and took action on it, then a lot of our biggest problems in the world would be solved. We've got a lot of smart people, a lot of really intelligent human beings. And unfortunately, in this industry, we've had a historically hard time aligning ourselves with profit. And so I guess to me, philanthropy doesn't just mean helping people and trying to improve the gaps in equity and create things that are sustainable so that everybody can have the opportunity to reach the highest level of Maslow's hierarchy, which is self-actualization or their true potential. That is all amazing. And that's kind of the surface answer that I could give you. But to me, I think that it goes beyond that. And I think that if we want the philanthropic industry to survive, we need to figure out how to align incentives with every other industry. We need to figure out how to be sustainable and how to generate income to continue trying to close those equity gaps and making the world better.
Yeah, that's a really cool perspective, and I think there's like a gap, a knowledge gap within my work, and it kind of answers that question. Like if you look at the sustainability sector, it's profitable, but the perspective within society is that impact work is not profitable. I think kind of like there's a big knowledge gap between people that who have been doing who have been pushing for profit within the years. There's kind of this forceful shift that is coming up. The shift is happening, and now that we have to more sustainably, otherwise, like we can see the changes that are happening. See the climate, the state of the world as it is at the moment. So I think it's quite a defining moment, and it's an aha moment for it's really interesting to be where we are at the moment. So like now, like within the knowledge gap is where it brings me to the next question. And what value do you see the Awari collective bringing to the world? What's that value of?
I see the Awari collective pioneering a new way to donate resources or give resources. It's quite rare to find a philanthropic endeavor in which you get clear visibility into exactly where your dollars went. Maybe you get a general overview, or most of the times it's just a generic thank you email and move on, depending on the amount of the donation. But for a micro donation, like under $100, it's quite rare to get that visibility. So that's what we're giving people. I mean, for example, one of our projects that we're supporting right now is helping to give care to severely malnourished children in northern Nigeria. There's 61 identified malnourished children across 7 communities that our partner has identified have a little bit less than a month to live if they don't get the care that they need. It costs $65 to save the life of one malnourished child. So anybody who donates and becomes a part of the community gets very clear insight into the progress of the treatment of that child and gets to actually learn their name and their age and what they like and who they are and who they could be if they had the opportunity to continue living and had their basic needs met. So having that connection to impact with minimal resources involved, usually it's only donors who are huge value donors that get that kind of insight. So I think that that's what we're giving people. And my hope is that this is going to trickle into every philanthropic endeavor. And this is going to be the new model of philanthropy, because the industry needs a kick in the butt and a way to engage more people and make more people care. And I think that it's just like common sense that like if you show somebody that they are genuinely helping another human being and give them insight into that human being's world and their story and their experience, people are much more likely to continue helping because it feels real. So yeah, that's the lasting value that I hope Awari is going to bring to the world and the philanthropy sector as a whole. Because I think that it's really, really important if people choose to give their hard-earned resources to something good, that they should be able, I mean, in my opinion, is really the bare minimum, but it's much harder said than done. They should be able to see where their resources are going and how it's making the world better.
That brings a lot of light to the next question, because with Awari collective and this initiative, bringing transparency towards where you're donating and who you're donating it to. This also highlights the role of individuals towards philanthropy. And now the next question is, Elena, you're now based in Switzerland. Let's say you're at the heart of the decisions where these decisions happen. What's the role of government within philanthropy? And has philanthropy currently died because there's lack of transparency, a bigger responsibility than the individual to carry out this issue?
Good question. So I think that the purpose of government historically has been that it's supposed to be representative of the collective, but nowadays it's not in most places. Switzerland is one of those rare cases where their government system is actually not corrupt and quite efficient. And the reason behind that is because they don't actually pay their politicians, and their politicians do their political role as a volunteer service in addition to their job. So that monetary incentive is not there, and therefore there's much less corruption. So yeah, I mean, I do think that government plays a huge role in philanthropy, like what we saw with Trump shutting off USAID. Those shockwaves rippled in every single corner of the world, within the US and without. So many people have died, so many projects have, so much money has been wasted because projects are left half unfinished, with that initial investment having already gone in and no outcomes. So I think things like that remind us how changing tides in government and in policy has a huge role. But I don't think that any one person or one politician should have the power to play around with that much money when it comes to philanthropy. Like, in my opinion, USAID should have been a constitutional amendment, or there should have been some kind of constitutional amendment within the US that protected the US's philanthropic interests in emerging markets beyond just like the rise and tide of one politician to the next. But that is the reality of the situation, is that we're going into a place where the government of many countries is starting to pull away from philanthropy. A lot of governments like the US, the UK, some of Europe are starting to say we've done more than our fair share, and this is no longer sustainable for us. And I think that that's fair. I don't think that the way that they did it is correct. Like, I think that USAID shut off was completely horrible because of the fact that it was just so abrupt, and they could have done a gradual phase out, and that gradual phase out would have saved a lot of lives and still given the outcomes of the projects that were ongoing, but then said we're not going to fund any new projects. That would have been more understandable, because I do think that financially speaking, it's not sustainable to be upholding activities in every other country. I think that there's a lot of responsibility that needs to go onto the governments of each country that is listed as a beneficiary. But all of this to say, I think that the government has a lot there. The government's choices in many different scenarios has a huge outcome and a lot of pull on how the wave of philanthropy goes. But I don't think that the government has a responsibility to be philanthropic above the individual. I think that if the individuals can come together and form a philanthropic collective, it makes more sense than for the government to do it based on the interests of the few. Because the interests of the few are never going to align with the interests of the many, or rarely. And the government is essentially the interests of the few. And we've seen that in working with a lot of grassroots partners. And we've seen the level of corruption in government in Kenya, in Uganda, in Nigeria. That's currently where we're active. But I've heard about it from friends of mine that work in DRC and South Africa. and Mali, many other African countries. So I don't think that the government is going to be the governments of these countries or the governments of countries that have been historical donors and huge philanthropic supporters are going to change anytime soon. I don't think that the corruption, unfortunately, is going to go away, but I do think that the people can come together as a collective and therefore be more powerful than the government.
Really nice insights. Advice would you give investors who are looking to go into philanthropy, and what are those kind of returns beyond financial returns that they should be looking out for?
Good question. So the advice that I would give to investors looking to get into impact investing or philanthropy is always center the local perspective. Always go for local over regional or country level or global. And the reason why I say that is because it's much more cost effective, kind of what we've seen in working with our pilot partners. For example, one of our partners, Afamdabo Foundation, came to us and told us that there was a village in northern Nigeria called Ichiwu that hadn't had clean drinking water in 10 years because it was so remote that they couldn't get a technician out there to repair the hand pump well. So we were able to work with them to get a technician out there. It was $140 US dollars, 130 euros to give clean drinking water to 2,500 people for 6 months out of the year. It's a caveat. The hand pump well only works during the wet season, but still, that's a huge win, and it meets the immediate need. And we're working on meeting the long-term need. All of that to say, it's much more cost effective to give that $140 directly to the community, directly to the repairman who's making the repairs, than to go through 10 intermediaries and have everybody take their share. So that's number one that I would recommend, is find vetted local initiatives to invest in. If you would like help sourcing, contact me, because I have a waiting list of like 50 organizations and projects that need help and that are very trustworthy. I guess number two, to answer the second part of your question about what to watch out for other than immediate financial returns, is return through quality of life and innovation. So it's no secret that when you improve the baseline quality of life of a given region or culture or people, those people now have more space to skill build, to innovate, to ideate, to problem solve, to help others, to make their community better, because now they're taken out of survival mode and they're able to start thinking about others instead of having to just think about themselves, which is a biological instinct. So I guess the second thing that I would say that is super important to look out for, other than just financial returns, is how much is baseline quality of life improving? And then use that to extrapolate to get to how much innovation should we expect from this region in the next 20 years. And that brings long-term sustainable financial return. Additionally, when it comes to morbidity and mortality rates, right, lowering the death rate, lowering the rate of disease in a given region adds to the labor force, adds to the number of people who can innovate, who can build, who can contribute to a society, and therefore adds to the GDP of the whole country. So I would also recommend looking at GDP of the whole country, even though it is a financial return. It's broader. It's not like an individual return that an investor would receive themselves. But that's a pretty good indicator of quality of life as well. But I'm also sure that lots of impact investors are aware of these things. And if there's anything else that people who are listening think that is also super important to know or super important to look out for from your own experience as an investor, I would really love to hear it, because I think it's always really interesting to learn new perspectives on these things.
So what's the advice that you'd give to an aspiring change maker, maybe someone in the rural Africa, or just someone anywhere globally who feels a need to make change in the world and they just don't know where to start?
Get in the room. Talk to as many people as you possibly can about your dream. And you would be really surprised that you'll probably find someone who can help you get there. I used to be really shy. I used to be very superstitious, actually, about talking about my goals and my dreams before I had actually made them happen. And I used to think that I would never tell anybody in my close circle or even people that I had just met anything about my professional aspirations because I didn't want to jinx it, quote unquote. And then I think the first time I started talking to somebody that I was a close friend of mine, and they told me, I had no idea that you wanted to do this. I know so-and-so who runs this internship program, and I can get you an interview. And I had no idea that that was even possible. I'd been trying to get into this internship program for 2 years. And that interview got me the internship and then kind of spiraled from there and made me realize that the more people you share your goals and dreams with, the more likely you're going to find someone who can help you make them happen.
So for the audience listening to this podcast and would like to directly contribute to the Awari Collective's mission, how would they get involved in what you're doing?
Yeah, there's lots of ways to get involved. I would recommend going to our website, awarico.com. Also, we're active on Instagram at Awari Collective. You can also email me, and my email is elena@awarico.com, and I'm sure that we can link all of these in the description of the episode. But I think for those who want to get involved, it's really important to take a look at our projects that we're supporting and see which one resonates with you, and then either reach out, or if you make a donation to a project through our website, we will automatically send you an email and add you to our WhatsApp community. So there's kind of two ways, either supporting through a donation directly on the website or reaching out to me to learn more information.
Great. So as we come to the end of today's podcast, what is your final insights to the listener?
Oh, that's a broad one. Only you have the power to truly change your life and your situation, and never listen to, this is super cliche. Everybody says, like, don't listen to the haters, but seriously, don't listen to the haters. Listen to that voice inside your head that's driving you. Find something that will make you wake up every morning and focus your time on that, and the money will come later. Outweighs financial drive, I think, any day. And keep making the world better and be nice to each other, please.
Cool. Thank you to the listeners of today's episode. If you were inspired by Elena's work, go check out their website, go donate to their website and get to participate in the projects that they have. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the YouTube channel. Until later.
Thank you, George.